The human brain was not designed to interact with hundreds of people a week. It wasn't designed for subway carriages and supermarket queues and tax offices. Comfortably, we're built to maintain social interaction somewhere in the ballpark of 100 to 150 souls throughout our whole life. What the human brain is or isn't designed to do, however, doesn't play much of a role if you're trying to pay rent in a major metropolitan area. I work as a tour guide in Prague. Every week, I get at least 300 tourists following my umbrella. 300 pairs of eyes that I have to see as individuals with hopes and dreams and futures which, hopefully, involve them putting money in my pocket. I love the city, and I like my job, and the people are, on average, pretty nice. But the human brain was not designed to interact with hundreds of people a week. There's a strange sort of headache that blossoms right behind your eyes if you've tapped out the limits of the prefrontal cortex. A piercing reminder that what you're doing isn't normal. An achy echo from your ancestry telling you, this isn't what you're built for. Come back to the woods. So, I do. 2 weeks before every high season, and 2 weeks after every high season, I pack my stuff, jump on an early morning train to Slovakia, and disappear off the face of the earth for a while. The nearest village has been around since the 17th century, but didn't get electricity until 1978. The cabin by the lake that my great-great-great-grandfather built was spark-free until 1995. It's only near the turn of the century that my grandfather decided a microwave would save everyone a lot of hassle around midnight snacks. There's no internet in the valley. You can get a bar or two of phone signal, but only if you climb the hills. Anyone with even a hint of aspiration has left the village and moved out to the city in search of opportunities, money, and non-fatal winters. Aside from the wildlife and occasional hiker, the place is nigh abandoned. For years, the lake has been my favorite place to shed my headaches. For years, I would count the days until I was able to escape the city and internet and responsibilities so I could kick back by a pond of unfettered tranquility. For years, the cabin has been my happy place. That all changed this week. Being a true Prager, I've never sat behind the wheel of a car. Even if I did have some experience driving, I still wouldn't trust myself on the winding hilly roads that lead up to the cabin. Luckily, I have an old university friend in Poprad whose father owns a car dealership. Every year, my friend gives me a lift to the cabin in some wild ride as we catch up on life. The first time he drove me, back in 2014, he kept on asking if I wanted him to pick me up in the morning. He didn't think I could handle a prolonged stay in a place without central heating or internet. I survived well enough, and since then, he's become less incredulous. I've never told him that on that first day I spent in the cabin, I had to run up to the forest at sundown to Google a video about fire starting. He still doesn't know, and I see no reason to tell him. Whenever we ride up to the cabin, we stop for a drink at a nearby village pub. I get myself a beer and a shot of something flammable. My friend, being a responsible driver, gets himself a kafala, a couple of cigarettes, a couple more stories to reminisce on, some final morsels of life news to catch up on. The pub has always been a nice closer to the ride up to the cabin. Yet, something was different this time around. Every year that we would stop at the pub, we would be a point of interest to the locals, or more accurately, my friend's car would be of interest to the locals. Set to inherit his father's dealership, my friend would always drive me in something flashy. This time was no different. He showed up in a bright yellow Humvee that looked like something you'd see roaring around a Hollywood blockbuster. The few village teens that made the pub their home would always loudly comment on whatever ride he brought and joke about stealing it. This time, they didn't. When we came into the pub, They were all sitting at the terrace nursing their beers, as they always did. Yet, instead of greeting us with stares and jeers, they sat in complete silence. Something had changed about the kids. They seemed somber. They seemed like they didn't want to attract our attention. The attitude of the village youths was strange. But what was even stranger were the bracelets they had on their wrists. Odd, chunky metal contraptions that looked like glued-together scrap. The peculiar fashion choices and sudden silence of the teens caught my attention for a bit, but my friend quickly distracted me with stories of our old classmates. Every year I like to take a personal project with me up to the cabin. I've tried out painting and writing and wood carving over the past couple of years, but this time around I thought I would experiment with fishing. I've never fished before, but there's plenty of carp in the lake, so I thought I'd give it a shot. When we got to the cabin, my friend helped me load out all of the fishing gear and set it by the lake. After a couple more cigarettes, my friend got back in his car and drove off back to the city. Since it was still light out, I was hoping to see if I could catch something, but the exhaustion from the journey quickly caught up with me. Instead of fishing, I sat by the lake and soaked in all the peace and tranquility. Once my eyes started to close, I retreated back to the cabin, lit a fire, and rested my eyes in bed. The dreams started on the first night. They were nowhere near as intense as they would get over the following days, but right from the start, there was something unsettling about them. I dreamed of the lake. I dreamed of the cold water and the smooth pebbles and the carp that sluggishly swam through the water. I dreamed of being a fish. Gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat, my legs straight and my arms glued to my side. When I woke like a creature of the sea thrown to land. There was still a faint flicker coming from the fireplace, but much brighter lights were peeking in through my window. I could hear voices, young voices, speaking in hushed tones of conspiracy. There was someone by the lake. I was drowsy with sleep and exhaustion, and my body felt completely foreign to me. But within a couple seconds, morsels of cognizant thought started to take hold. The voices belonged to the village youths. I left my fishing gear by the lake. The rod and cooler and tackles weren't cheap. Still drunk on sleep, I ran out of the cabin and started to shout for them to leave. Their flashlights shifted the moment they heard me burst out of the door, but the teens didn't start to flee until I started throwing rocks in their general direction. The half a dozen silhouettes fled with their bobbing flashlight beams in tow. They ran up the hill and disappeared into the forest. Yet, even after the teens left, a glint of illumination still hovered above the lake. It was a cloudy night, and the world beyond was pitch black. Yet above the lake, a faint, pinkish light bobbed. In my rush to chase off the interlopers, I had not taken my glasses. The strange light above the lake wasn't lost on me, but the longer I squinted at the water, the fainter it got. When the night descended back into pure darkness, I just consigned the unnatural illumination to a trick of the eye. I convinced myself I was just tired and panicked. I shouldn't have. In the morning, I was pleasantly surprised to find my fishing gear exactly where I left it the day prior. It was nice to know that the teens didn't steal the equipment. That brief burst of joy, however, was the only positive aspect of the day. After a light breakfast, I made my way back out to the lake. Even as I walked from the cabin, I found myself unsure in my steps. It was as if my legs belonged to a wholly different creature, as if I had woken up in foreign skin with foreign limbs. As I cast my bait, I kept on worrying that I was going to fall into the water. Even as I sat down, well out of danger of slipping into the lake, I found my hands gripping the grass beneath me as if I was about to be thrown in. Over the years, looking out at the water always filled me with gentle calm. I've always found so much tranquility by the lake. Being away from people, from the constant bustle of the city, from all the notifications and dings and vibrations of my phone, being alone out in the woods has always made me happy. But all I wanted that day was to be surrounded by other humans. I wanted chatter. I wanted noise. I wanted to be reminded that I am a human being. I was uncomfortable sitting by the lake, but it wasn't until I caught a fish that my discomfort rose into a shrill panic. As I reeled in the catch, my hands were numb and my fingers felt weak. Having to bring in the catch sowed cold sweat all across my back. Seeing the fish made me vomit. It was a perfectly healthy carp. There was nothing wrong with it. Seeing the creature strung up on a hook, however, drove a deep malaise through my body which escaped my throat with sickening strength. Having lost all my appetite, I threw the fish back into the lake and retreated back to the cabin. I made an attempt to chop some wood, to read, to journal, yet nothing felt right. Somewhere in the back of my skull, wordlessly, something was dragging me back to the lake. I wasn't meant to sit by it. I wasn't meant to walk into it. I was meant to descend all the way into its blue depths and press my body against the smooth pebbles that covered the bottom of the lake. I did my best to meditate, to clear away the thoughts, or at least to interrogate their source, yet the harder I tried to grasp at my feelings, the more ethereal they felt. I found my arms pressed against my sides and my body squirming, as if I was trying to swim against a strong current. Without my consent, my lips pursed and started to pop. The moment I let my mind wander, I would find myself doing a terrible impression of a fish. Every fiber of my being wanted to drag me back to the lake. With effort and dread, I managed to steady my mind through the afternoon. I cooked myself a meager lunch and chopped some wood and tried reading one of the paperbacks I packed for the trip. All throughout the day, my body was sleek with sweat. All throughout the day, the lake shimmered in the back of my mind. I convinced myself that I was just burnt out, that my strange twitches and pops and fixations were all just symptoms of an overworked mind. Hoping that a bit of rest would rid me of the fish thoughts, I set the fire and called it an early night. The visions that had come to me in my sleep the night prior were intense, but they paled in comparison to what came to me on the second night. I found myself in the depths of the lake once more. The water was frigid, yet even though I could perceive the cold, my body felt in harmony. I was drowning and taking fresh breaths at the same time. My body had scales and my lips popped, and with each labored inhale I could feel my neck expand. I was a fish. I was a fish, and I was swimming through the dark depths of the lake, and in that darkness I saw a light. A pinkish light. A light that called to me. A light that lured me in like a moth to a flame. My brain was numbed with sleep and confusion, yet as that light started to take shape, my conscious mind started to wake. I was a fish, and I swam through those dark waters towards the light, but I could also feel the wet covers of my bed. Desperately, I wanted to fully stir from my dream and be free of the nightmare. Before I did, the source of the light manifested in the cloudy waters of my subconscious. Eyes. 2 bloodshot eyes floated in the curtain of lake scum. They stared straight into my soul. You weren't built for this. Come back to the lake. The sight startled me awake, yet I was still not fully a man. My body hit the floor of the cabin and flopped around wet and confused, as if I were still a fish, as if I did not belong on land. In utter terror, I flailed on the ground, trying to calm myself down. After what felt like an eternity, my body ceased its panic. I was no longer banging my limbs against the furniture, but I could not unpry my arms from my sides. I spent the night breathing in dust, trying to convince myself that I am sane. Beyond my window, I could see that faint pink light shimmering by the lake. At first, I insisted that it was merely a byproduct of the nightmare, but when sleep fully left my head, I knew it was not so. I lied to myself. I told myself that the light beyond my window was simply the sunrise. The glow outside bobbed and was most certainly not a hue found in nature, but I told myself it was the sunrise. I lied to myself, yet when those early morning rays of sun finally did peek in through my window, the unnatural glare disappeared. It took me well over an hour to climb to my feet, but once I did, I felt much more secure in my body. Whenever I looked down and saw my 2 feet, I was given clear evidence that I belonged on land. I knew I was a man, I was certain of it, yet from beyond the window, the wind-caressed water still called to me. You weren't built for this. Come back to the lake. The first night I had spent in cabin alone back in 2014, I nearly begged for a ride back to the city. When I had first arrived, I tried setting a fire to warm up the cabin, but found it difficult to keep a flame going. Since it was a nice day outside, I gave the project a break and went to read by the water. I just figured I would set the fire later. When later came, I found the task just as difficult. With the sun setting and the Slovakian autumn closing in around me, I also found the cabin much colder. After a couple failed attempts and 2 burnt thumbs, I started to panic. If I wasn't able to light a fire, the night would be terribly cold. With the world almost dark, I set out towards the top of the hill where there was phone signal. I was going to beg my friend to come pick me up so that I wouldn't spend the night in single-digit temperatures. The defeat burnt hot in my chest, and I dreaded making the call. I dreaded making the call so much that when I finally did manage to catch a couple bars of signal in the dark, I elected not to make it. Instead, I Googled instructions. The video took ages to load and ate up an unreasonable amount of my phone bill, but it allowed for guidance. After many more failed attempts, I finally managed to get the fireplace going. When the flames finally caught and I was certain they would stay, I hollered through the cabin like a madman. I felt like I had achieved something. I felt like I was built for life away from the city. I never told my friend about my near surrender. I am far too proud for that. No amount of pride, however, would stop me from retreating from the terrible fish thoughts that haunted me. Struggling with my steps, with sweat pooling on the crease of my jeans, I climbed the hill once more. With my fingers feeling the disobedient worms attached to alien limbs, I dialed my old classmate. I was near tears when I finally managed to make the call. I was so ready to retreat back home, to breathe in the smoggy air and listen to the rowdy crowds, to go back to a place that I could comprehend. Yet, the moment the phone started to ring, my mind cleared. In a cascade of sober thoughts, the world around me suddenly felt completely ordinary. I was a man. My legs made sense. The lake below seemed familiar and regular and not scary at all. I sat down in the grass, feeling familiarity in my limbs. When my friend picked up, I didn't say anything about the manic fish delusions. Instead, after briefly gathering my thoughts, I told him about the village youths that had snuck onto the property after he had left. We chatted about how strangely quiet they were in the pub, and about those strange bracelets they all had, and about how these days the younger generation is strange in general. Soon enough, we were just talking about how old we've both gotten. My friend asked me if I thought that the kids would come back and whether they might be any real trouble. I told him I felt safe. I told him I felt safe at the cabin, and as I sat there, on that hill, overlooking the lake, I believed it. I was fine for the rest of the day. I still stayed away from the lake just to prevent any further bouts of insanity, but after the phone call, it felt as if everything leading up to it had been some weird anecdote I heard in a bar. When I got back to the cabin, I tried reflecting on the past 2 days in my journal, but my entries were sparse. The whole fish affair just didn't feel important anymore. Instead, I spent most of the day tearing through a Stephen King paperback on the same couch where my grandfather used to read to me when I was a kid. Whatever fish curse had ailed me was lifted, and never seemed that bad to begin with. In the afternoon, I took a long walk through the woods and even made it to the edge of the village. No one saw me, and I didn't see anyone, and I figured I wanted to keep it that way. Once I got home, I lit a fire, made myself some scrambled eggs, and went back to reading. Briefly, before I decided to go to sleep, I found myself worrying about the lake again. My madness was an obscure memory by then, but the visions from my dreams still held on. I was terrified that I would once again dream of being a fish. The more I thought about it, the more I could remember the heaving gills on my neck and the scaly texture of the skin I had worn in my dream. To keep the thoughts away, I read for a couple chapters more. By the time my eyes were starting to close, I was too drowsy to worry. All I could do was hope that my mind had fully given up on its obsession. As I drifted off, I even found a bit of confidence about the past 2 days being a fluke. I did not dream of being a fish that night. I dreamt of something much worse. The lake, in my dreams, was much deeper than it had ever been. Standing on the shore, I felt as if I had my feet planted at the edge of a skyscraper. The dark depths of the water called to me, demanded that I jump, insisted that I sink. I looked away from the water and focused on my feet. Forcefully, I reminded myself that I am a man, that I have feet, that I breathe air, that I am not meant to live in the water. At first, I managed to keep myself distracted by staring at my human legs, yet soon enough, a familiar shine stole away my attention. That pink glow, those blood-red eyes, they were rising from the deep. Those same tortured human eyes that I had seen in my dreams the night prior stared deep into my being, yet now I could see more than just the eyes. I could see the whole monstrosity to which they were attached. It was a fish, a carp to be exact. yet its skull was swollen with a massive brain that pulsed with blinding pink light in the tempo of a sluggish heart. The creature was giant. It rose above the lake, dripping water like a flying submarine. The thing stared at me. It stared at me with its bloodshot human eyes. It opened and closed its fish lips with little rhyme or reason. Yet, in the back of my skull, I could hear a dark, demented voice which undoubtedly stemmed from its pulsing brain. "You weren't built for this. Come back to the lake." In sheer terror, I fled from my dream. My body met the floor with a dusty thud. For a moment, I feared that I would once again be paralyzed in a non-mammalian state of mind. Yet the adrenaline pouring through my veins reminded me of my humanity. I rose to my human feet and tightened my human fists. Fear still played a quiet melody in the nether regions of my soul, but most of my being was consumed by a symphony of rage. I was not a fish. I refused to even consider the idea. I was willing to deliver swift violence to anything that would try to convince me otherwise. When I burst out of the cabin, I expected to see the same mammoth fish I had witnessed in my dreams. I did not. The fish was there, its brain still swollen beyond comprehension, and its bloodshot eyes staring at me. But it was tiny. In my dreams, the creature was a leviathan of epic proportions, yet in the flesh, the creature was only slightly bigger than a carp. Drunk on anger and confidence, I grabbed a stone and threw it at the floating fish. My missile flew true, but it did not hit its target. Instead, the flying rock slowed down as it traveled through the air. Just as it was about to hit the misshapen carp, the projectile came to a complete stop. It floated in the air, as if gravity were but a theory, and then, with horrid speed, it shot straight at me. The creature's aim was worse than mine, yet the rock was propelled at a terrible speed. When the window behind me exploded into a hail of broken glass, I knew there was no fighting the abomination. The floating fish moved slowly, yet so did I. As I made my way up the hill, I found my legs distant and distorted. My lips kept popping. My clothes turned drenched under another wave of cold sweat. The closer the terrible fish moved to me, the more discomforting my body felt. The gills which I did not have on my neck were struggling to take a breath. "You weren't built for this. Come back to the lake." As the voice slithered through my soul, rocks started to whiz past me. The missile which I had launched at the monstrosity was ineffective, but the floating carp's retorts were painful. The pebbles started to hit me. A numbing pain spread through my kidneys. Blood started to pool down my neck. In my rage-induced panic, I had grabbed my phone from the nightstand. As I lumbered up the hill, I tried to command my fingers to dial. I was trying to ring up emergency services, yet with another strike to the head, the numbers on the screen turned blurry. My feet gave up. With both legs seizing up, I fell flat on the grass. My body rigid, I began to roll back down the hill toward the nightmarish beast. I was certain I would roll all the way back to the lake. I was certain I would roll across the shore and deep into the water. I was certain I would not float. The lake called to me. "You weren't built for this. Come back to the..." My phone was lying a meter or two above me where I had dropped it, yet the dial tone cut through the insanity like the blade of a sushi chef. My legs and arms extended, and I propped myself up on all fours on the grassy hill. For a brief moment, I met those bloodshot eyeballs. They stared deep into my soul, but then, with something resembling panic, they shut. With a high-pitched yelp too shrill to have come from its misshapen lips, the creature rocketed backward. It crashed into the center of the lake with the weight of a sinking stone. I crouched on all fours, looking more like a beast than a man. I found my sanity returning to me. After a couple labored breaths through my human nose and human mouth, I could hear a voice. At first, I feared that the voice belonged to the fish. I feared that the retreat of the madness was temporary. My eyes filled with desperate tears, but soon those tears turned joyful. The voice I was hearing wasn't that of the fish. It was my friend. He was confused about why I was calling him in the middle of the night. Without thought, I told him that something had come up. I had to be back in Prague the following evening. I would need him to pick me up in the morning. My friend was still confused as to why I was calling him about it in the middle of the night, but after some insistence that it was an emergency and that I had to grab an early morning train, he relented. He said he would pick me up at the cabin. I told him I would wait for him by the village. I never returned to the lake. I couldn't risk it. The thought of coming across the fish once more was far too horrendous to bear. I left everything I brought with me to the woods out in the cabin and made my way to the village in my bare feet. When he picked me up the following morning, he did ask questions. I was, after all, in my pajamas and had dried blood on my neck. It looked as if I had gotten into a fist fight with life itself. My friend asked questions, but I waved them away. I had simply gotten into a nasty fall while hiking and lost my shoes. There was no need for me to recover the rest of my belongings if I was going to come back soon anyway. All I needed for travel was my phone. I told my friend that I would be back in Slovakia soon, but in earnest I want to stay as far away as possible. For so long the lake used to be my happy place, but the 3 days I had spent there have taken that away from me. As I sit on the train back to Prague, I stare at my reflection in the window, searching for the man I know I am, not the creature the lake beast tried to make me. I remind myself that I am a human, that I have limbs and a job and health insurance. I remind myself that I am a man and that I was built to live in the city.
And so concludes this episode of the United People's Institute of Science series. Thank you for commenting and liking the video, and a special thank you to the patrons such as Kus, Bob Konderg, CR Iptid, Christopher Barunda, Dante Kincaid, Matthew Trahan, Mr. CreepyPasta, Daniel Wengel, Quiet Pills, Charlie Cooper, Joyce, Paul Evans, Shion, and Hayden Solomos. If you'd like to join these fine folks in supporting the arts and getting early access to content and your name in the credits, mosey on by patreon.com/MikeJLanger. That's it from me this week. Hope everyone is safe, sane, and healthy out there.